Hello, everybody. So today I want to talk about why it's so important for your returns to be at a minimum of 15% a year and perhaps much more than that if you want to make sure that you are actually making it and that you're actually making wealth. And one of the reasons for that is the denominator, the money stock, the very reason behind this channel. We can say that every single goods and services in our economic life is divided by the amount of dollars that are out there, by the money stock. That's why we quote everything in dollars. For example, if you go out to buy a stock, that stock is going to be quoted in US dollar, and you're buying a business. And so if there are 10 times more dollars today than there were in the 90s, for example, that business is automatically going to be much more expensive today in nominal term, but it's not going to be more expensive in real term. The same is true for goods and services that you sell, for example, such as labor. If you are not getting a 15% raise, the cost of your labor is not keeping up with monetary inflation. And so in an ideal world, you want your labor, you want to be paid a portion of a money stock that is going to remain constant and that is not going to be diluted, that is not going to be shrinking. But in the world that we live in, the money that you have is necessarily shrinking because more and more dollars are printed. And this has been the case for many thousands of years, started with the Romans clipping coins. Um, but the fact is, we have seen an acceleration as to how fast money is being printed in the system, such that keeping your cash is becoming riskier and riskier. And also, a lot of investments may seem like they do very well, like the S&P 500 doing 10% a year, but you're actually most likely losing money investing in the S&P 500 in real term because the money stock is growing much faster than your investment in, say, the S&P 500. So I believe much of a reason, for example, why real estate goes up has to do with monetary printing, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with the fact that your home is more valuable now than before. In fact, your home is probably a bit less valuable because the construction is getting older. So in a perfect world, the number of dollars would be fixed. And if that were to be the case, over time, over 10, 20, 30 years, everything would get cheaper. Everything would get cheaper because productivity would enhance the returns of the companies that you own, of how easy it is for companies to make certain products. So over time, we should actually have deflation if the money stock was not increasing so fast. But because the money stock is increasing, because we have monetary inflation, we have a very distorted system of assessing value. And it's so important to understand how quickly the money stock is growing because you want your share of the total of dollars out there to grow. You don't want your nominal amount of dollars to grow. You want the share to grow. And for the share of all of the dollars that you own, compared to the dollars that are there to grow, you need to make sure that you beat monetary growth. You beat the growth in this denominator right here. So let me get started with the first part of the story, which is M2. So M2 represents much of the money, most of the money stock within the US financial system. It's very important to say within the US financial system because there is another system out there called the euro dollar system, which actually probably grows much faster than M2, but we don't know that because it's a very shadowy system, and I'll cover that in the next episode. But let's look at just M2 within the US. And so we can see that consistently, this is data from the Fed, by the way, which I've analyzed in Excel. We can see that consistently from January 1959 to October 2008, monetary growth has grown from 6.8% to 6.5% between 2008 and 2020. So money growth has grown pretty fast, even with QE. It has grown pretty fast, but something happened in 2020. So in 2020, the deficit of the US government was so unexpected, so huge, that the Fed had to go out and print all of this money to go buy treasuries. And when they did that, we actually ended up with a 14.8% increase in the money supply between February 2020 and August 2022. So I believe that this is here to stay, because I don't think the deficits of the US government are going to decrease as much as the Congress office is saying it will decrease. I think this is wishful thinking. And I think between 1958 and 2020, our M2 growth was very, very much related to the traditional banking activities of lending. But we've come to a shift where now the US has so much debt that it's very hard to come out of this hole. And it's very, very hard to take over it. So let me just walk you through a little bit why I think M2 money growth, i.e., the growth of the US dollar within the US financial system, why I think it's here to stay. So let's look at the US financial system alone, right? So first of all, why have we grown until 2020 at 67%? Why have we diluted our money by 67% for over 50 years? Well, we've done it like that because that is how the fiat system works. The fiat system is loans make deposits, not the opposites, right? Oftentimes you'll hear people say, oh, you put money in a savings account and that money is going to be loaned out. No, that is not how it works. Commercial banks create money. And so whenever you go out and get a new loan, that is new money that is added to the money stock. And the usual rate for that for 50, 60 years has been 6 to 7%. And that hasn't shifted a lot. Despite the first QE in 2008, that hasn't shifted a lot. I do think this is going to stay pretty much the same, although I am concerned about the fact that the 3% reserve ratio has not been reinstated. And so if you go on the Fed's website and you look at that, you can see that there used to be a 3% reserve ratio, which meant that for every $100 that a bank lent, you needed to have 3% in the reserves. That's zero now. So theoretically, commercial banks can create money in an unlimited way. And so they did that in order to free up liquidity in the banking system to support lending, right? To support lending. But that is still going on. So that may have a small effect on the money stock and on growing the money stock, perhaps even faster than 7%. What's even more concerning, perhaps, is that the Fed has no intention of reimposing reserve requirements anytime soon. Even though we are in a different phase now in 2022. So commercial banks will keep creating money, and these loans will keep reaching the economy and increasing the money supply. So whenever you get a loan, you dilute the money for everyone. That's how a fiat system works. But I think it will be closer to 15%. And why is that? That's because of a deficit, right? I think there will be a huge deficit in the future. And you can see this is the Congressional Budget Office estimating that in 2022, like magic, we are going to decrease the deficit, and in 2023, and we're going to go from 2.7, 2.8 trillion to just under $1 trillion in 2023. That is the assumption that the budget office, the Congressional Budget Office, is making. But I think that's a very, very hard assumptions to believe. And by the way, if that assumption was true, and if they actually succeeded at doing that, you may get to monetary supply growth of, say, 10%, because the Fed would still have to go out and finance the free remaining percent, or at least most of it, and there would still be traditional commercial banking activities going on. But I don't believe they will stick to the 2023 plan. And for an example, I want for this is we've had two huge bills already passed since the budget was approved, right? So we've had the student loan forgiveness, that's 30 billion per year, and we have the Inflation Reduction Act, which is 26 billion per year, and the bill claims that higher taxes will be able to pay for it, and that it will pay for itself. But I believe that is hard to believe, and so all we know is that the spending will be made. We know that for sure. We know the money will be spent for sure. We don't really know if taxes are going to pay for it. We don't know that. We're having wishful thinking here. So just in a matter of 3 months after publishing the budget, They've increased the yearly deficit by $56 billion of unfinanced commitments. But the Fed has raised interest rates, right? The Fed has raised interest rates, and we are entering a recession as a result of them raising interest rates. And so what does that mean? Well, that means people have ran away from growth assets. That means there have been way less investments in the economy. People are very careful right now. And so when you get a recession, especially one induced by the Fed, like the one that we're entering now, you typically see a drop in tax receipts. And so when you look at the budget office, this drop in tax receipt, which as we are in a recession now, will impact 2023, 2024, these drops in receipts is not accounted for that. Because the rate has been raising interest rates, which is what is causing the recession, by the way, the US will refinance its debt at a higher rate, right? Again, this is not taken into account into these projections. And also the outlays, right? How much how much the government spends on various entitlements and various giveaways, that will go up at least as much as inflation, I believe. And so for that, I think it's going to be about 9%, which is what they did to the cost of living adjustment of Social Security. So on one hand, I expect a typical drop in tax revenue for a recession of about 20%. Right, and I expect also an increase in entitlements as a result of inflation, and perhaps as a result of the economic crisis, which will make more people say decide to retire or decide to join the system for some reason or not. So let me just make some back of a napkin map as to why I think we're still in for 15% growth in the money stock in 2023 and perhaps 2024. So if you look at those numbers and you modify them for 2023, you get to an income of $3.9 trillion for the federal budget, and you get to a spending of $6.4 trillion for a federal budget, which means that I calculate that there will be a deficit, very simply, a deficit of $2.5 trillion, $2.5 trillion deficit in 2023. And that's without the student loan forgiveness and without including the Inflation Reduction Act bill and without including any bill that may come, say, within the next 6 months, right? I don't include any future bills or any future spending. So if they have a $2.5 trillion deficit, well, I'm assuming that most of that deficit will be bought by the Fed. In fact, let me go back to that slide. If you look in the Fed has about 63% of all of the treasuries lately, 63%. I think that will go up to 70% because Japan has been selling a lot of bonds. China is wary about buying bonds because some of the bonds have not been honored by the US. And so I don't think these foreign nations will step up. There is also a trend against bonds right now. A lot of people who are in the retirement community are not buying bonds, right? They are recommending their clients to buy stocks, right? A lot of investors are buying stocks. They're not touching bonds, or they're buying Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin may replace bonds. You hear some people claim that. So they're buying crypto, they're buying other assets. Bonds are not as popular. So I think the Fed will end up buying most of these bonds. So if you assume the Fed buys 70% of the bonds, that's 1.75 trillion in extra monetary printing on top of the baseline, on top of the 6.8% from regular commercial lending activities, from regular bank activities. So if you add 6.8%, which is the natural rate of money growth without the Fed financing deficits, and you add to that the Fed financing the deficit that I expect in 2023, if you add that, you get 15%. 15% in M2 growth in 2023, and I think it will be the same in 2024 and perhaps many years to come. Because, for example, a lot of the tax receipts, a lot of the revenue comes from capital gains. Capital gains have been very high in late 2020, 2021. There's been lots of capital gains. A lot of savvy investors are creating losses right now, right? They're shifting their stocks, shifting their investments to lower those capital gains in the future. So I think there will be a big hit to the revenue. earnings are going to go down as well. There will be a big hit. And then deflationary technology. Deflationary technology makes it so that you have savings. If you buy an electric car, that's so much savings. You have to earn less money now to make a living because you're saving money by buying different techs and different technologies. So I do believe over the long term, 15% is here to stay. And I believe that's a conservative estimate. For example, I'm not even including mortgage-backed securities. Who is going to be buying mortgage-backed securities, right? It's the same thing. The rates have been going up. These mortgage-backed securities have lost a lot of value. Who's going to invest in mortgage-backed securities? We see that's the second biggest item that the Fed buys. They might have to keep buying mortgage-backed securities. So if they buy mortgage-backed securities like they have in the past, we're closer to 16, 17% in monetary growth. So I do believe M2 will continue to grow very fast, which means that if we stick to 15%, your investments have to grow at least 15% just to keep up with monetary inflation, just to keep up, right? And if you want to have a decent return, and not keep up, but do much better, you almost have no choice but to invest in high growth companies that grow really fast, companies that will beat this hurdle rate, or invest in assets that have a supply that will not grow nearly as fast as the US dollar grows. That's the way out. And so that's the whole reason for this channel to exist, is to try to look at these opportunities of assets that will either outgrow the growth in M2, or those assets that are so rare that they will not grow exponentially in number, right? So that's what we'll talk about, and we'll talk about that a lot. And one last reason, which is perhaps the most astonishing thing about this, is, as you can see, I titled the video between 15 and question mark % per year, because there is a whole other system of dollars which has a very real impact on the US, right? These dollars often make it back to the US. And that's called the Euro-dollar system. And the Euro-dollar system also has its dynamics of its own, and it's money that is held outside of the US financial system. And that will be the topic of the next video, because the money stock, the total money stock in the world, the total amount of US dollars out there, includes both the dollars within the US financial system and outside of the US financial system. And the Eurodollar system, the dollars outside of the US are not talked nearly enough, in my opinion. So I hope to cover this in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you see why I think this is so important and so essential to the investment thesis of so many companies. There are so many companies that I would love to invest in, but I just can't. I just can't, because they don't have that hurdle rate. They don't have 15% growth. They don't grow fast enough, and they will be, they will be hurt by this monetary printing. So that's why we care so much about beating the denominator and growing actually our share of total US dollars out there, not growing the nominal number. The nominal number is kind of based on a flaw, right? But you would assume that the amount of dollars out there are always going to stay the same. They do not stay the same. They increase very, very fast, and you need to increase as fast as they do. And that is monetary inflation for you, not to be confused with a CPI. And we'll make another video about the distinction between the two. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video.